want y'all to stop letting white people tell y'all stuff.
Whenever anyone says that somebody else has a victim mindset, I instantly become suspicious of everything that they have to say. It's one of those phrases that has become meaningless, like when somebody says, "Oh, you're sheep." Then that lets me know that you probably don't do much critical thinking. There's this belief on the right that if you acknowledge history and the past atrocities that have happened to African Americans, then somehow that means that you're embracing a victim mindset. It means that you are not going to be successful and that you are inherently accepting failure. For some reason, they think that an honest acknowledgement of historical fact and how it impacts the present handicaps you, because apparently only a denial and lying to yourself about your history is the only way to succeed, as opposed to knowing and understanding your history and then, in spite of all of that, pushing forward and embracing success and being ambitious, knowing that you have a lot to overcome and you are determined to do it. It has only made you stronger. Because people like me understand that this history was not that long ago. My parents were the first to integrate the school that I eventually graduated from. I had to deal with racism because I went to a predominantly white school. We have accepted the reality that we live in, and we are often working to change it. And acknowledging the truth of that does not inherently mean we are victims. Many of you have this preconceived notion about what Black people are like and our mentality, and y'all are just wrong. You should have conversations with Black people that disagree with you more.
For those who don't know, Florida's Board of Education's new Black History standards require that middle school students learn how slaves developed skills which, in some instances, benefited them. Yes. So we have scrapped this week's lesson plan, and what we're going to do is we are going to read from the slave narratives. We are going to hear history told directly from the mouths of enslaved people. Now, trigger warning, this will be hard to listen to. And I'm going to tell you now, very plainly, very bluntly, that I don't want to know how it made you feel bad. I don't care. This is the perfect opportunity to journal your thoughts and your emotions. Agreed? So the first excerpt is coming from the book Far More Terrible for Women. And we hear from Julia, Aunt Sally Brown. She says, "We wasn't allowed to go around and have pleasure as the folks does today. We had to have passes to go where we wanted when we'd get out. There was a bunch of white men called patty rollers. They'd come in and see if all us had passes, and if they found any who didn't have a pass, he was whipped. Give 50 or more lashes, and they count out the lashes. If they said 100, you got 100. They was something like the Ku Klux Klan. We was afraid to tell our masters about the patty rollers because we was scared they'd whip us again." And our next story comes from Lulu Wilson. She says, "Now, Miss Hodges studied about meanness. She was mean to anybody she could lay her hands to. But she was special mean to me. She used to beat me and used to tie my hands and make me lay flat on the floor and put snuff in my eyes. I ain't lying before God when I say I knows that's why I went blind. I get to thinking now how Wash Hodges sold off Ma's children. He'd sell them and have the folks come for them when my ma was in the fields. When she'd come back, she'd raise a ruckus. Then many the time I'd see her plop right down to set and crying. And don't forget that enslaved people came in all ages, including the children. From the book, We Are Your Sisters. When I was about 6 years old, they take me into the big house to learn to be a housewoman, and they show me how to cook and clean up and take care of the babies. I didn't have to work very hard, just had to help the cooks and peel the potatoes and pick the guineas and the chickens and do things like that. Sometimes I had to watch the baby. I had to get up way before daylight and make the fire in the kitchen fireplace and bring in some fresh water and go get the milk, what been down in the spring all night, and do things like that until breakfast was ready. Old master and old mistress come in and they eat in the summer, and I had to stand behind them and shoo off all the flies. She was 6. And then we hear from another little girl. She says, when I was a little bitty girl, they used to make a scarecrow out of me. They make me get up before daybreak and go out into the cornfield, and I'd sit there way past dark so to keep the scrows from digging up the young corn that was just popping its head above the ground. A heap of mornings, the frost bit my feet, and when it was time to go back to the cabin, I could hardly walk. She was a itty bitty girl. So, while Florida is trying to minimize the harsh realities of slavery to make sure white people don't feel bad, I'm here to remind you that it was a horrible, brutal, inhumane practice that, quite frankly, I don't care about your feelings about slavery. And a reminder, I will be going live Sunday, August 6th, 12 p.m. We can discuss the supposed merits of slavery.
White people, watch this video, and I'll be right back.
He published a book called Race, Tendencies, and Traits of the American Negro, in which he lays out all the numbers, and then he concludes that if we simply avoided allowing black people to have any access to health care, that within 2 or 3 generations, the whole race would die out, and that would solve the race problem in America. When Teddy Roosevelt, 1912, proposed a national health care system, people said no because black people will get it. When Franklin Roosevelt proposed a national health care system, it was the same thing. We don't want black people to get it. When Truman tried it in 47, same thing. Don't want black people to get it. We have to figure out a way to keep black people from using Medicare. And the way that they came up with was to have a 20% hole, a gap in Medicare, so that you had to pay 20% of your doctor's bill and your hospital bill, and that would discourage poor black people from showing up at the hospitals. Nearly 100% of the reason why the United States is the only country in the world that doesn't define healthcare as a right is because of racism. He published a book called Race, Tendencies, and Traits of the American Negro.
How many times do I have to say this? Racism is a detriment to you white folks, poor white folks especially. Because of racism, you, poor white folks, can't even get good health care. Because they thought if they could deny health care to black people, that we would have been eradicated a long time ago. But hey, we still here. And they have not changed the rules. How crazy is that? Even with Social Security, you have to pay 20% because of racism. We keep telling you. BIPOC keep telling you. Black people keep telling you, it is not us that makes your life suck. It is those racist politicians and their racist legislation that they think that's going to harm us, but harms you at the same time. And they don't care if it harms you. They don't give a shit. And then you continue to vote against your own interest. All because a bunch of rich white people told y'all to hate black people because black people are doing stuff to you as a whole. And we're not, because we don't control shit. We don't control the healthcare system. We don't control Social Security. We don't control your wages. We don't control shit. But they continue to tell you that it's us. So you turn your focus on us and harass the shit out of us for no fucking reason, when we have no power to affect your life as a whole community. Pay attention. Ending racism is not just beneficial to BIPOC. It's super beneficial to poor white folks and middle-class white folks. I said what the fuck I said. Remember, diversity equal power. We can change the world when we work together and protect black women. Until next time. And also, go into the comment section and let me know what you think about this video. I'm interested to see.
Hey, good morning. I'm so glad you brought this up, because for many Black Americans, specifically Creoles, our cuisine is the physical manifestation of the memories of when we were Africans. Take ifu riru, for example. Back home, it's made with amaranth and other spices. But over here in the Americas, when they brought us over, we didn't have access to those ingredients anymore. We had to do the best we could with what we had to create the closest approximation of home we could. So some enslaved Ghanaian man or woman wanted a taste of home, and they used the only ingredients that white people allowed us to grow: collard greens. And for those of you who are old enough or country enough to remember, you remember seeing old people, some of them, put tripe in their collard greens. It's because they remembered. They were raised by people who remembered. For Nigerians, it's slimy okra stew. You know, it's traditional, it's home, it tastes like home wherever you go, you remember that. But for Creoles, it's okra and tomatoes. Sometimes with slime, sometimes without. Because our enslavers didn't like the way the slime tastes, so we found ways to cook it to fit their tastes, right? And like most memories, they're corrupted. Sometimes the shirt may not be the same color, or the series of events didn't happen the same way that they did in life, but you remember them happening that way. It's the same way with our cuisine. We remembered what food used to taste like when we were Africans, and just trying to get a taste of home, we tried our best to recreate that. And in the process, we created our own culture here. See, while the Africans were creating a taste of home, those who were born in America were just doing what mom and daddy did. Those memories became our culture. And what I've noticed in the diaspora, a lot of immigrants want to compare their immigrant experience to the Black American slave experience. And those two are different things. Take the Windrush generation, for example. They immigrated to London, and they brought with them their culture, their language, their slang, their way of life. They brought that with them, and their descendants today and themselves still rely heavily on that tradition. But Black Americans, when we were Africans, they beat all the Africanness out of us. Our traditional languages, our traditional dance, our traditional way of life, our traditional hairstyles, they beat that out of us until we assimilated into what it was they wanted us to become. We were no longer Africans, nor were we Americans. We were a nationless nation of people. And the only thing that we had were memories of home. And the best way we could recreate those memories was through food. You see, food tells the story when history is silent. That's why many of us love the flavor red. Doesn't matter what the flavor is, cherry, strawberry, fruit punch, doesn't matter as long as it's red. We like that flavor red because it's a memory of when we were Africans and drinking Bissap tea. Back home, we had jollof rice. Creoles, we have jambalaya. The Gullah Geechee, they have red rice. See, these are memories of when we were Africans.
What's a historical fact that you had to learn on your own and not in school?
So I recently visited some of the slave castles in Ghana, and I was sick to my stomach. About 100 to 150 people were forced into these slave dungeons. Once they reached the slave dungeons, the human waste that they had to sit in and stand in was about knee deep. And when I say human waste, I mean the poop, the pee, the throw up, the blood, the menstrual blood. All of that they had to stand in, and everything else that comes out of the human body. Not only that, they had to breathe in and inhale all of those toxins because there was no ventilation in those dungeons. Mind you, they weren't just sitting in there for days or maybe weeks. They were sitting in there for up to 3 months straight. The conditions were so bad that even as I stood there hundreds of years later, I can still smell the human waste. I mean, I was sick to my stomach. Y'all, was people up in there coughing. Those tiny little lines up there, those are not carvings done by an object. Those were done by people's nails digging into the stone wall because they were trying to desperately escape the death dungeon. Men who fought back were put into those death dungeons. And let's say they put about 10 of those men in that death dungeon. They wouldn't pull out the dead bodies until the last person died. That skull and that X represented death. It meant once you went in there, you were not coming back out alive. And also, there were churches built up over these slave dungeons. And as women and men were screaming, these so-called holy people were sitting above them worshiping God. Not only that, they specifically put these churches over the dungeons to represent heaven and HE double hockey sticks. Part 2 will be coming up because what they did to the women was disgusting.
The Black Panther Party's free breakfast program was a revolutionary act, not charity. So let's talk about why. I mean, there has to be a reason the FBI said it was dangerous, right? So there were all these kids, mostly black kids, who were going to school hungry every single day. Raise your hands, how many of y'all can concentrate when you're hungry? Exactly. So the Panthers' first response was, let's feed the kids. Boom, short-term problem resolved. But that's not it. They'd ask the kids, why were you hungry in the first place? Now they're thinking about what has caused their hunger. Why are we in a food desert? Why do all the corner stores in our neighborhood only sell old food? Or this one, why can the Panthers supply us so much with so little, and the wealthiest nation in the world can supply us so little with so much? See, those are the kind of questions that got the FBI on their toes. The Panthers showed the world that America does not care about black people, and that maybe there's a better way to govern that puts people rather than profits at the center. Oh, but we're not done, because poor people all over the world could identify with the black struggle in America. Good white, brown, yellow people, whatever, thinking, oh, the Panthers are onto something. Because they used a basic necessity like food to organize people nationwide. And yeah, they raised funds from selling the newspapers. But at least in Oakland, they forced all the local businesses to contribute food or money to the programs. It didn't matter if the owner was black or white. If you were doing business in the black community, you had to contribute to the Panther survival programs. And if you didn't, they were going to boycott your business. Because food is a basic right? But we live under capitalism where it has a price that some people can't afford. But the Panthers forced everybody to model a different society, where the kids were supplied food by the capitalists that once starved them. That's why the free breakfast program was revolutionary. That's why J. Edgar Hoover said that the Black Panther Party was the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. And he said that right after they started the free breakfast program for school children. How about that?
So DeSantis clarified the new standard regarding slavery in Florida. You know, the one that says that slaves learned skills that in some instances benefited them. Yeah, telling Fox, he told them that that particular passage wasn't saying that slavery was a benefit, but it was saying that there was resourcefulness and people acquired skills in spite of slavery, not because of it. That's not better. That's not better. He's still trying to put a positive spin on an abhorrent time in American history. You see, they should not have been in a position where they had to learn coping mechanisms, because that's what it is. Coping mechanisms for trauma, if that's what he's referring to. But if you go by what the curriculum says, what the curriculum says is that they learned skills that in some instances benefited them. That's what the curriculum says. Regardless, Black people were brought over in chains. Their hair was shaved off. At auction, they were poked and prodded as though they were cattle. They would open their mouths to check their gums and their teeth. Women's breasts were manhandled, and oftentimes they were taken aside so that their privates could be inspected. Husbands, wives, parents, and children were separated. They had their names changed, their culture and their language beat out of them. They were in a foreign land with foreign people forced to labor all day. Enslaved black women were forced to breed to repopulate the slaves because the transatlantic slave trade came to an end in 1808. So they were forced to procreate, against their wills. They had no choice in mates, and they were often essayed. And Virginia, well, this was their thing, besides tobacco. Virginia bred slaves and sold them to the Deep South. Enslavers had free rein to treat their enslaved people as they saw fit. I mean, sure, there were laws about how they should treat their enslaved people, but at the same time, there were loopholes. And in most states, as long as the punishment did not maim, mutilate, or imperil the lives of enslaved people, brutality was legal. There were, however, exceptions that allowed white people to kill enslaved people with impunity. Here, for those who want to tell me that a black man signed off on the curriculum, that does not make it right. It doesn't make it right. Do you know anything about the black man who signed off on the curriculum? Well, let me tell you about him. He's a right-wing conservative who served under Reagan. Do you believe in him now? Because I'm going to tell you, just like I would tell him, the thing that both of y'all missed. Because I know what he meant by that statement. You see, the examples that he provided: agricultural work, painting, carpentry, tailoring, domestic services, blacksmithing. He supposes that these are all skills that could be used at the end of the Civil War. But what both of y'all seem to have forgotten is that the black codes exist. Yes, the South enacted the black codes, which restricted what black people could and could not do. And the South enacted laws that told black people, you have two choices for a job. That is domestic services or farm work, because they wanted to harvest cotton. So if you were a blacksmith, sucks to be you. But my guess is that they won't teach about the black codes because of the Stop Woke Act. To teach about the black codes means that you have to teach that the white Southern Democrats wanted to remain superior to black people. You have to teach that the Southern white Democrats were racist. And the Stop Woke Act says that you can't. You see, that's the problem with the Stop Woke Act. You can't accurately teach history if you have to leave out context like that. When you have to make history more palatable. When you have to rewrite history.
Oh, I can explain why this happens or why so many punks go conservative, but it takes an understanding of capitalism intersectionality. Or I should say the lack of understanding. Let me explain. We live in a land built off of violence. This land was stolen. The labor used to build this land was stolen. And this is all in the name of capitalism, to maximize profit. And to do that, you need to exploit people. And it's easier to exploit people when you have systems of harm, keeping them in positions that make them exploitable, like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, all of that stuff. An example of that is, well, if you keep white people hating black people, thinking they're the problem for everything, then they're going to get mad at black people for everything and not mad at the capitalists who are exploiting them. Like the reason why nobody can afford healthcare. They just didn't want black people getting access to healthcare, so they just made it inaccessible to anyone without money. And by proxy, this affects poor white people. Their life sucks too because of racism. And systems like this exist for all of the other marginalized groups, and it affects all of us. And that's kind of where punk comes into all of this. We've created our own community that rejects that part of society. Saying like, no, we're not going to stand for this bigotry and hate. We're going to build our own community where we look out for each other. And over the years, you get a lot of white men who join punk, not because the system isn't working, but because the system isn't working for them. So like, yeah, they're mad, but the minute that, they get older and they get a job and then they start reaping the benefits of their privilege, they're no longer mad. And they made punk their entire identity, but then they started doing the things like, being an adult and getting a job and buying a house and all of these things in which their identity and their privilege made it easier for them. They started reaping the benefits of their privilege, which made their life easier. And as long as you don't have empathy for people that don't look like you, it's easy to just reap the benefits of this system and be happy about it. And that's why it's important to be radical. And what does radical mean? It means addressing an issue at the root of the problem. If you get into punk because you hate the system and you hate oppression and all that bullshit, and you see the root of that problem is capitalism and how the profit motive is what drives this exploitation and harm towards these marginalized groups, then there's no way in fucking hell you can just turn conservative. They didn't turn conservative, they were always conservative. That's why the majority of them are white and men who go down this punk to conservative pipeline. They never unlearned their racial bias, they never unlearned their sexist bias. Because to them, punk was just putting on a costume and being mad about something without actually doing anything to change it. And you can't change the world until you change yourself. And that's why today there's even punks who are well-meaning and are still liberal who haven't gone down that pipeline yet, but they still say and do shit that's racist, that's homophobic, that's sexist, and nobody's calling it out because that's the majority of the scene. I mean, there are people in the scene like, hello, me, queer people of color who do call this shit out, but we're often feeling alienated in the community because a lot of the community acts like this. And that's for all the people who say, well, I don't know what type of punk you're going to. Yeah, it's because you're white, because you're just not noticing these microaggressions and you're excusing it. And as long as punks continue to not inherently tie punk ideology to leftism and making that connection to dismantle systems of oppression and capitalism, that shit's gonna continue to happen. There's no room for white supremacy in punk. There's no room for transphobia in punk. There's no room for patriarchy in punk. There's no fucking room for capitalism in punk.
Of course, it's always the black women with weaves who want to hate on my beautiful, free-form, curly dreadlocks. It's like, no. Bye, Shaquandra.
First of all, Becky with the hideous hair, keep black women out of your mouth. Secondly, if there's one thing that we can agree upon, they are most definitely dreadlocks, because the look of them is dreadful. I'm pretty sure the smell is dreadful. I mean, to be honest with you, I've seen wet bison hair that looks better than that. And what's so funny is that you making it out as if weave is just a black woman's thing, but y'all wear weave and hair extensions and wigs too. Let's not act like you don't. Another thing I want to add is black women don't call their locks dreadlocks. They call them freedom locks or love locks or lady locks. What you have is on some damn Norway Viking type shit. And to go ahead and deliver the kill shot, you really truly think that black women are hating on whatever the fuck that is on your head? Why would they be hating on you when they know you're not touching this or this right here? And you sure as hell ain't fucking with this right here. So with all due disrespect to you, ma'am, you can't compare where you don't compete. So while you sitting there talking shit about black women's hair, why don't you go somewhere and educate yourself on how to get some real locks done? Oh, but one more thing though. Don't try to copy a black woman when you're doing it. Have the day you deserve.
Wonder if I can see the N-word. Wait, can I really see the N-word?
I want every well-meaning white person that follows me to pay very close attention to her, because I'm not even talking about her, but I am going to talk about her abstractly. She is the reason I hate the word ally. She is the absolute number one reason why I hate the word ally. White women like her and white men just like her. Because Because when I first got on this application, she was on here. She had the black scent and everything else. But she was in the Army. I was in the Army. I said, okay, battle buddies. You know what I mean? And then she started talking about how I was raised around black people. I don't know any other way to be. I saw something that was off then. And then she showed us who she truly was. Now you see what she's doing here. See that? That is an ally. She is the reason why black folks aren't just opening our arms and opening our lives to just any well-meaning white person. She is the reason that the bar to be even considered an accomplice to black, brown, native, and indigenous people is 50 feet higher than it was yesterday. I said this a year ago. All cookout invitations have been canceled. Canceled. We will be dealing with them on a case-by-case basis. And trust me when I tell you, we have been denying them motherfuckers left and right because of people like her. It's not enough to put Black Lives Matter ally in your bio. Don't come to me and tell me, oh, well, you know, I've been to a couple of rallies. You want a cookie? I don't give a fuck. Don't come and tell me. Don't come and tell us. You know who you talk to? Them. And who's them? Your family. Your mom and dad that sit up and consume Fox News 24/7 and go to Trump rallies all the damn time. And they think the inner city and people that live in the inner city is hell on earth. Confront them. Tell them. That uncle that taught you how to ride a bike, but he just can't stop saying offensive shit about black people, Mexicans, and Jews, tell him. Tell him. Your aunt that works at the government office downtown, who always comes over and talks about those people being welfare cheats. They just want something for free. Tell her. Don't tell us. Don't. Because people like that are the reason the bar is so damn high. And every time a motherfucker comes out that is a ally, a fake ass one at that, the bar gets 25 feet higher. You are no longer going to get maximum trust for minimum effort. If this is what you truly want to do, strive to be an accomplice, not a damn ally.
This poem is for the black boy who was shot in front of Burger King in Charlotte, North Carolina, though I will not say his name just for points. When I was 7 years old, I got stung by a bumblebee for the first time, and I saw its body fall to the ground because bumblebees always die right after they sting. Last week, I was sitting on the back porch with my dog, and this giant bee came from underneath the stairs, and I swatted that thing right out of the air, y'all, because that's what I taught myself to do in that situation. I saw its body fall too. I found out later it was actually a carpenter bee, harmless. They don't even have a stinger. And immediately there is a poem begging me to write myself as the cop and the bee another unarmed child. But wouldn't that be humanizing the cop and animalizing the victim? And haven't we seen enough of that already? And haven't I already written that poem? So in this poem, the bee is just a bee. Even if I swore it had a gun, even if the mother swears the boy had wings, even if the hood swears the bee boy, bee fly, see how pliable sight can be. How with enough effort, one thing can become another thing. Like how justice can become a doomsday or a holiday, depending on who gets off. And I tell myself, don't say their names, but the activist in me says, say their names or no one else will. The slam poet in me says, don't you dare build a score off a deconstructed name. And I won't, because I know how pliable a name can be, meaning with enough effort, it can become my son's name, my daughter's name. It could be mine one day, and I know how dangerous a name can be. The 10 o'clock news said a name 3 times, and a civil rights organizer disappeared a year later. A name protested on film, and we all watched the body camera give up the ghost. A name is a mouthful of pollen. A name is a trending body breakdancing on my news feed. And how do you say the name? Do you say it like a mother calling her child home, or do you say it like a perfect score at a poetry slam? Last week, I felt guilty for reacting to a bee based on perception. The bee couldn't educate me. It was my job to educate myself. When I was 7, I saw the bee fall to the ground, but I didn't kill it. I mean, it's dead because of me, but it did sting first, right? See, the boy just had bright eyes and a curious mind, like most carpenter boys who die without ever using the stinger that they don't even have. But like I said, sight is pliable. A person can see what they want to see. Can you see now? Why we sacrifice animals and insects in our poems just to show the value of a real human life? Can you see how the burden of proof always denies the body of evidence? And isn't the body supposed to be the evidence? If the carpenter gives up his life, is there redemption for those who choose not to believe on his fallen body? The bee was just a bee, but the boy, his was the name we feared to say because of how difficult it can become in the mouth of a mother. Like boy, fly, home, the soft, pliable name that can become joy or grief or buzzworthy, depending on who gets off.
Is it because I read books and talk about educating ourselves and becoming better?